Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices hosted by World Information Transfer and focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Today, our presenter is Khadija Mustafa, who is an accomplished business leader and board advisor who has been on the forefront of the global tech sector. Her 23 years career experience with Microsoft has given her a broad background in both incubating new and cutting edge AL businesses and driving multi-million dollar efforts. She is now transitioning into her next executive challenge with a leading AL company in the Middle East as more global players expand their efforts in this space. Khadija is passionate about leveraging technology to make positive impact on people's lives and society. She is vocal advocate for diversity and reskilling. She has delivered inspiring and informative talks on AL and other topics at prestigious platforms such as TEDx and Harvard Business School's YPO program. She is a founding member of Chief of Executive Network for Women Executives. She is focused on transforming lives with integrated and holistic health approaches. Over to you, Ms. Mustafa.
Thank you so much, Dr. Durbach. It's such a pleasure to be here and to have a discussion on this incredibly important topic. I think we all know that AI it's been the rage for some time now. There's so much information about AI that sometimes it just gets incredibly confusing. And I know there's a lot of questions around it. So as Dr. Durbach mentioned, I've spent like almost 25 years in the tech sector, majority of it in Microsoft. And I've had the honor and the opportunity to really engage in the industry and spend the last 5 years commercializing two of Microsoft's AI businesses. I left about 10 months back. Before I actually got into the tech sector, I dabbled in a media career. I was interning at CNN and CBS. And one of the things I always believed in is the power of the visual media to really tell stories. So what you'll just see is I want to share some of my thoughts to sort of provoke discussion questions and just share some reflections of what I'm seeing in the space. As you know, there's a tremendous amount of information around the space. And I just want to put it around a couple of key themes. So first of all, AI is everywhere. Having these discussions with different groups, it's very interesting that people will always ask questions like, tell me a little bit more about when do I use AI, or where is AI not impacting the industry? I think the better question is that there is no place where AI is not going to impact it, whether it's a career, whether it's how we consume, whether it's technology, it's the way we live, work, play. It's pretty much touching every sphere. Sometimes we know it, most oftentimes we don't. We're only beginning to scratch the surface of this, but I think it's really important to understand and maybe ask that question as to, are there any professions and vocations that won't be touched by AI? And if I was to scratch my head and really think about it, I actually can't think of it. And if it hasn't touched AI today, as we progress and as the journey continues, we will definitely find AI transforming pretty much every corner of what we touch. Now, whether that's government and public sector, all the way to manual manufacturing, professions, white collar, knowledge worker based professions, think about education, think about pretty much whether it's a mundane task that's going to get automated or it's going to be a complex process that is transformed today, or we haven't even yet realized how it can get transformed. All right. I don't expect you to actually be able to read this chart on the right, and you don't have to. What I want to just say about this is there is a lot of investments going into the sector, as many of you have already seen. And what's interesting is typically you will see a lot of big tech that is actually, sorry, before I get into that, I wanted to share this quote. Um, it was interesting because I found this quote somewhere and I actually went back into some of the AI tools to see if I could figure out who said it. And I couldn't find a source. And it was really interesting because I was trying to figure out if ChatGPT had actually created this quote based on a lot of other information, and I still immediately wasn't able to see it. But I think this quote really sums up the power that we have with this technology and how we can make a difference. I know a lot of people have a lot of fear and concerns around how AI is going to develop and how it's going to potentially overtake us. But I think, like, for example, weapon systems, like a lot of good and bad things out there, it all depends upon how we harness it. Okay, so coming back to this one. Um, as I mentioned, don't squint, but CB Insights actually has some really good information. As I've been following and really tracking what's happening in the industry, one of the key things is there is a tremendous amount of investment going into this space from big tech. And there's like an arms race. And just last year alone, there was more than 75 AI startups that have been backed by big tech. And what's interesting is a lot of these deals, I mean, this represents like a roughly 57% increase from the prior year. Now, last year's hype with Gen AI has done a great service to AI in the sense that it's brought this topic at the forefront of everyone's imagination. As you know, I'm sure your grandmothers and grandfathers are talking about it as well. But having said that, AI is not new. AI has been around. It's been around actually for decades. Ask the people that have been toiling away for the last more than 50 years in this space. I think the key is that the buzz that started, I would say more like end of 2022 with OpenAI and ChatGPT, is basically it has put AI into everyone's imagination. So it's done a great service of that for that, but it doesn't mean that it just came up, as many of you know. Now, with big tech making all these investments, I think what's really critical is, and you'll notice that you see some names and then you don't see some of the other names. Some other companies like Meta and Apple, they haven't been on an acquisition spree per se. They're actually building, for example, open source tools in the case of Meta, and then Apple did make an acquisition or so. So different big tech players are coming out in different ways. But this trend is signifying quite a shift from the traditional venture capital domain, investing in these different private companies, with big tech wanting to make a play because, again, this is a sort of a revolutionary moment. And there's, this is also sort of creating a situation where you have AI haves and AI have-nots. And, basically you have the wealthiest and biggest companies, as you can see, that are investing in the space. They're building models. So at the top of the chart, you'll see different categories. You've got investments going into a lot of the LLM, the large language model plays like ChatGPT, OpenAI, and a lot of the other companies that are out there. Lots of investments going into infrastructure, and then lots of investments also going into very specific verticalized technologies. Now, this is important because as you're looking at this entire ecosystem playing out in front of you, it gives you a sense of where the opportunity is, right? Because you're following the money, and there is a ecosystem effect. And it's an ecosystem effect that's having an impact on the way our societies are also shaping up and where opportunities are going to emerge and where they aren't. This is also raising a lot of questions around strategies around build, buy, or integrate. What I mean by that is, and by the way, this is for companies, this is for nations, as many of you think about your careers, either touching this space or being influenced by it. So many companies are building the models that you're going to consume. You're going to use proprietary data. So many companies out there, for example, right now, are not going to build the large language models like a ChatGPT. They're going to consume it, and they're going to put their proprietary data and then use that for insights to solve whichever problems they're focused on. Other companies or nations are thinking of actually building the systems because they know that by doing so, it's going to be important for them to stay, number one, relevant, and also to become key players. And others will simply be consuming some of this technology. Okay. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the transformation of jobs. This question and this topic comes up so much because everyone is concerned about, what does this mean for me, right? What does this mean for me as an individual? What does this mean for me as a nation? And as you can see from the chart here, this is from IMF and ILO, the International Labour Organization, and they've done some calculations, and this is as recent as January of this year. And on average, if you look at the far left part of the slide, it's really talking about 40% of the world's jobs being impacted by AI. If you're in developed countries, the percentage is actually higher. It's closer to 60%. And if you are in emerging markets and sort of, as it's defined, the less developed, I don't really like these terms, but the notion where there's different type of jobs, the impact is going to be less. There is a ton of data out there. I like data to sometimes guide us, but the reality is there's a lot of conflicting data out there. I think the Uber message is AI is going to impact pretty much every country. It's going to impact majority of the professions out there, whether that's today or tomorrow. It's going to create and impact income capabilities across nations and within. So as we know, there's a disparity already. That disparity is going to get bigger, but it's going to shift. So the people in the nations who adopt and sort of revamp themselves to be able to receive and play a role in this new environment will benefit. The individuals that reskill and become AI conversant, their economics will also change within the nations. So it's all about harnessing the capability and making sure that we're not letting this revolution, we're not letting it bypass us as individuals. This is going to change the way people do work across, whether it's the C-suite or, like I said, manual labor. And regardless of age categories, that's the other thing. A lot is being said about the youth. Obviously, you're set up in a better situation if you're growing up in the age of AI. But for those who are already in the workforce, there's tremendous opportunity, which I'll talk about in a bit on how you can compete. The other interesting thing is it's not even about becoming AI conversant. If you're working in companies or organizations, like the UN or public sector government, we're gonna enter a phase where we're gonna have, as leaders and managers, we'll even have to figure out how to manage AI agents that are going to be doing the job. So it's not even managing humans, it's managing agents that are going to be taking on workloads. So understanding how to manage in that environment by not just becoming conversant in AI, but also being able to lead teams of humans and machines, essentially. Okay, make sure the screen's moving. All right. So this is just the beginning. If you look at a lot of the way AI is being used right now, the fact that we're using conversational AI to summarize documents, write resumes, write emails, there's a lot of that. And it's been touching everybody. But this is just the beginning. And there's a lot of great work that's been happening. And by the way, it didn't start just when, ChatGPT came up, as we know, but it wasn't on everyone's mind. But there have been a lot of new things that are coming up. And I wanted to share this story because this was actually from, I believe, a day or two ago. And China, I mean, basically, if I take a step back for a minute, right now, if you think about the AI race, two nations that stand out both in terms of research, in terms of adoption, in terms of ecosystems that are popping up. I mean, US and China are very big in this space. And so speaking of China in this particular case, and healthcare, as we know, there's a lot of AI is being leveraged in this industry. But in this particular case, they were conducting trials. The thing is called CARES Copilot 1.0. And essentially, it's an AI surgery consultant that they're leveraging in 7 different hospitals in Beijing and parts of Hong Kong. It's being used leveraging open source technology from Meta. And it's basically a co-pilot for the surgeon. And not only is the surgeon able to benefit from getting assistance, because this technology is actually referencing over 1 million academic articles and analyzing a lot of diagnostic data across MRI, CT scans, ultrasounds. But this AI assistant, the whole purpose is that not only is it going to be multimodal, meaning today you see a lot of text being used in AI, but also audio and images. And the goal is to eventually enable the surgeon to identify and alert surgical risks. So this was fresh off the press. This is one example of how we're going to continue to make cutting edge advances in this space, and how those advances are going to come from different parts of the world, where research together with public sector and private enterprise are going to come together to really harness and provide benefit to populations and improve things, in this case, like surgical outcomes. Because as we know, healthcare, like education, like climate change. So a lot of these big challenges is ripe. These industries are ripe for disruption through AI. Okay. Similarly, I want to give another example. This is also a recent one around the drug development process, pharmaceuticals. As some of you may know, it takes billions of dollars, more than I used to actually, for Microsoft, I used to manage Pfizer Pharmaceuticals for 5.5 years in our business with them. I think it takes about 10 to 15 years and billions of dollars for a drug to come to market. Now, in the COVID time, this changed because government stepped in. It was, a global pandemic. It was an exception. But you have these other companies that are coming up. And right now, we have not had a drug that's been designed fully. I mean, the first set of drugs, I should say, that are going to be designed with the help of AI are in clinical trials, as this article is alluding to. And it's not the first time AI techniques like natural language processing are being used in the drug discovery process. But this particular one was focused on actually finding drugs that could, or molecules that could potentially help with cancer. And I encourage you to just, go online and read how the impact is being made, because in this particular case, the gentleman in question was an 82-year-old. And certain drugs were just not suiting him. When you have to go through clinical trial, it's a very lengthy process. And how through machine learning and leveraging natural language processing, they were able to find specific compounds that could be targeted and could help him in addressing cancer. And this is just the start, because we're going to see these industries, again, start leveraging this in a much broader way. Okay. I wanted to talk about another theme, because obviously I talked about the US and China. The AI disruption is transforming on other nations. It's giving nations and regions an opportunity to rise, right? So especially with an audience like yourselves, as you think about the UN and you're sitting with people from all over the world and sort of having that dialogue. The Middle East is another area. And I want to cover that. Of course, I'm going to be going there, taking my next challenge. But I think more importantly, the Gulf Middle East has been a region with a tremendous amount of financial power. And this is an example where we've seen Silicon Valley, especially over the last year, if you were an AI business, you were getting funding and financing. But if you were a lot of other businesses, money was getting dried up. So there has been a lot of cross-pollination going on between Silicon Valley and the Middle East. And traditionally, the Middle East and the Gulf Middle East, having a lot of the sovereign wealth funds, has been financing a lot of the innovations that you are seeing in other parts of the world. And they're finally, I don't want to say waking up, but they're recognizing that they don't want to be just a bank account for other companies and innovations happening in other geographies. They want a piece of the pie. So now it's about being able to invest in different innovations globally, but the Middle East themselves, they want, and especially UAE and Saudi, they want to make sure that their populations are getting trained. They want the next set of unicorns, which are businesses valued at more than $1 billion, being born and raised in their environments, taking into account their local needs as well, and projecting outwards. So there's this whole movement and shift in thinking happening. They're also recognizing that AI is an opportunity to leapfrog, right? It's a once in a generation time, and especially if they want to diversify from their oil wealth into different sectors, that this is a great place, and it's one where they can skill their population, they can come up with new companies, they can encourage the overseas companies they're investing in to invest back to enable ecosystems to rise out of that region. So it's a very interesting thing that's happening. As you can see on the screen, this is particularly talking about the growth projections in the Middle East itself, and some numbers around what that's going to look like. But it's sort of the new AI race. What's also happening geopolitically is because of what I mentioned between US and China as being two mega um, AI destinations and sources. The Middle East is also being pulled in needing to sort of align with one or the other. So it's becoming another tech race. And you've got other countries that are joining up, both in terms of the technology they're leveraging, the companies they're partnering with, and the nations that they're partnering with, which is going to have implications for the rest of the countries in the world. I want to talk next about, okay, so for those of you that may not know FOMO, it's about the fear of missing out. So there is this AI gold rush, as I talked about earlier. Not only is a lot of money going into the space, but the whole focus of education, it's raising a lot of questions around so many different things. Having spent the last 5 years commercializing two AI businesses at Microsoft, it's been very interesting. I was literally circumnavigating the world, talking to companies as diverse as telcos, financial services, media and entertainment, whether it was Mexico, call centers in Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, all over the world. And it was interesting that before the flurry of ChatGPT came up, end of 2022, AI was relegated to enterprise pilots, right? So the CEOs would delegate it to members of their executive, not even sometimes executive teams, some line of business, and they would say, sure, go play around with this and see what value you can get. A lot of the results never bubbled up to leadership because some of those projects died being departmental. A lot of the ROI wasn't realized because things like the data estate, sort of who controlled it, how you managed it, is a big part of how AI solutions work or don't work, or work well or don't work. So in the enterprise space, the age of AI, or I should say, is still, we've only scratched the surface. Right now, the flurry has helped companies have this fear that they have to do something with AI. Board members are asking companies, the C-suite is asking their leaders, what are you doing with Gen AI specifically? But the category of AI is broader than that as well. But what it's done is it's to a point right now where we really haven't seen this come to a head, which basically means that if you think about the demand for resources, the demand for having knowledgeable people, the demand for reskilling existing employees to really get the benefit of what AI has, that area, it's wide open. There's going to be a lot of impact, but there's also a lot of opportunity, meaning there's going to be a lot of jobs that are going to fundamentally change. So as individuals, if we are not reskilling and moving forward, there are going to be professions that will be completely automated. There will be many that are going to have human in the loop. So it's going to be human and machine. working together. There's going to be cases where when we talk, and I'll talk more in the reskilling section around the kinds of skill sets. But the point is, the reality of AI in the enterprise and public sector has not been realized. There's tons of pilots going on, but they are in limited scale. Enterprise-wide solutions, there's still fewer examples. The other thing is the whole commercial versus open source space. That, as I mentioned to you, especially with the large language model efforts going on, there's proprietary systems and they're open source. That has implications for companies, for governments, and for nations that want their data and their IP to reside in-house, whether it means in-house in the country or in-house in the enterprise. So there's still a lot that needs to be determined. The last thing I'll say here is with the amount of money that's going in, especially in the startup scene, and some of these startups are, they're brand new and some have been around, and there have been hundreds of millions of dollars going into some, individual companies. I would say in the next, probably within 24 months, we're going to see the dot-com era for AI. So there will be a reckoning. There will be a lot of companies that will not survive and business models that have not seen the light of day. And there will be other winners that will start emerging. Okay. Now, AI as the equalizer, I think we've got this great opportunity where we have leveled the playing field as it relates to AI. Especially from a nation perspective, I'm very excited. And by no means do I want to say that we don't have infrastructure challenges. I know perfectly well that significant parts of the world are not connected. Access to the internet and devices remains weak in many parts of the world. But let's just assume for a minute, if we can address and solve some of those problems, all you do need is an internet connection and a device. And you can sit, whether you're sitting in New York City or you're sitting in Jakarta, or you're sitting in Timbuktu, you can take free courses, you can take low-cost courses, you can take a $5,000 course or plus at one of the top institutions and start reskilling and learning about AI. There's so many platforms out there. I'm sure many of you are already using them, Coursera, Udacity, great courses on LinkedIn. The big tech companies are laying out AI courses. We have never had such an amazing opportunity to reskill and level that playing field as we have today. And the reality is there's no secret sauce to AI. There is no holy grail where X, Y, and Z has a 4-year college degree. In fact, 4-year college degrees in the realm of reskilling is also going to completely change. There's definitely, absolutely places where people are getting their PhDs, computer science degrees, PhDs in mathematics, et cetera. You need all of that. But there is this whole arena where you need subject matter experts. You need people who've got existing knowledge that needs to be AI-ized, right? So you need to become conversant in AI. And by reskilling and taking short courses and taking them often, I think represents a great opportunity for people. Unlike others. All right. This is really important. This is just one example. We are living in an age of deception. So with all of the great opportunities we have with AI, we also have challenges. When you think about deepfakes, disinformation in the sense of democracy, right? Whether it's democracy or not, we're living at a time where we have to keep our eyes and ears open. Everything that we think we see and the information that we're getting, and especially the stuff that goes viral, we are basically a short distance away from starting something that could be catastrophic. The earlier slide that I showed you, was just an example of how, as we all know, in the contentious environment that we live in, all it takes is a deep fake video showing a conflict, showing something that probably did not happen, or if it did happen, it came from another time, that could incite a lot of polarization and violence. And, as consumers of the possibilities of what AI can do, we just have to keep our eyes open. And if something sounds sensational, chances are it is, and we need to really ask questions around that. Similarly, the regulatory environment is evolving. Many of you have seen there's lawsuits going on around IP. A lot of the large language models, it's all public information. So they're training on data that exists. So it exists out there, but the question is, there's IP infringement going on. So we're going to see a lot of this start impacting both commercial business models, but also where governments start and the public sector has to start playing a role in regulating this environment. The challenge is, as we all know, AI is moving so fast that I think it's going to be very hard for regulation to keep up, which doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. But I'm a strong believer that the regulatory environment needs to include the public sector together with private industry, together with local government, together with nonprofits, together with academia that enables us to get people from all walks of life with different interests aligning to really, help us evolve in this area. And then just quickly, I want to talk about some key themes that are coming up, right? So given all the investments that are going on with AI and because of what AI can do, especially in the robotics space, again, robotics is not new. People have been working, there have been companies out there that have been dealing with this, but the humanoid investment is picking up an incredible amount of steam just in the last several months. I think many of you would have seen that announcement with Microsoft and several other OpenAI, NVIDIA, Bezos, etc., invest in Figure AI. That's just the start. So there is a lot of investments going into this place. The robotics companies are leveraging Gen AI to make more advancements. This is the bleeding edge of AI. The use cases would be amazing if you think about, for elderly care, if you think about differently abled folks. I mean, just the opportunity is endless, but this is a very key trend that you're going to start seeing, I think, in 2024. It's going to start taking even, it's going to be expanding. All right, last thing before we hit the questions is, so what does this mean for us, right, for you and I? A couple of thoughts. When the thing with AI is, with the large language models, there are the people who are building the technology, there are people who are consuming technology, and then there's all this data out there. We need more diverse voices to get engaged. I often have people say, oh, but I'm not a technical person. You don't have to be a technical person. There's obviously, the profession needs technical people, right? So whether you're the one who's responsible for actually building the algorithm, or you've got a computer science background, or you're a PhD in mathematics, but you need teachers, you need linguists, you need lawyers who understand what doing deals in the age of AI means. You need government officials who understand that we're putting regulatory regulations in place. Everybody needs to understand it. And especially when it comes to even further upstream, getting involved in the algorithms, what data it gets trained in, the bias, the transparency, just, whether it's your kids, whether it's you, whether it's your friends, whether it's your parents, make sure you're getting involved. And like I said, if something seems spectacular and you've seen it in an age of AI, please question it. Don't just forward it. Let's make sure we're not lighting the fire of the potential conflicts that can just get worse with what's happening in AI. We have to learn every day, and there's so many ways of just learning, reading, and educating ourselves. It doesn't matter if you're in the AI profession or not. It's everyone's responsibility to be here. And you have to figure out, are you going to be the one who's going to be the disruptor or the disrupted? Because the reality is, if you're sitting in some corner, you will get disrupted. So whether you have a company, whether you're thinking about your career, whether you're a parent, and then government's role, we don't just wait for government to step in. I think as citizens, we have to demand, because the AI, this whole ecosystem is being shaped. And what worries me is that as citizens, forget about as students or as professionals, but as citizens, this AI is evolving so fast that if we don't play an active role in defining how we want it to look, we will simply become subjects of it. And I don't think that's something any of us really want.
Thank you very, very much, Khadija, for an extremely important presentation on the influence of AI And now we will turn over to our moderator, Susie Hallock, for other questions. Over to you, Susie.
Thank you. We received a lot of questions. It's such an interesting topic, and thank you so much for the interesting presentation. How do you recommend current students and young professionals prepare themselves for this wave of AI in the workplace? For example, the types of skills they should potentially focus on developing, maybe types of programs they should consider.
Yeah, great question. So there's so many different ways. If you are technically inclined, right, go ahead, take your technical courses. Let's just say if students are coming from a computer science background, you do have to take courses that are more focused on giving you exposure to AI type projects, right? So even if you come from a technical profession, it's really important to do that. So I mentioned there's free or very low cost. I mean, Coursera has got Andrew Ng. I mean, these are set up by very iconic people. So there's all these different online courses. So I think just even if you're busy all week, just make it a point to take a course a day. A few hours in a week. Dedicate that to learning. If you come from a non-technical profession and you're thinking, well, I mean, I'm not really directly working in this, but because you do have to prepare, right, the era of AI in the workforce, number one, play around with the tools. There's so many tools, and of course, ChatGPT gets the bulk of the exposure, but there's so many others. Now, with some of the big large language model companies, you have to be a business, so not everything is a consumer grade tool. But there are so many vertical tools. So look at LinkedIn Learning. I really like it because you get all types of people. You have people who've made it their job or their thing to constantly list all the different tools. So if you're a creator, you want certain types of tools that are like, let's say, you're a writer or you're into music or what have you, there will be tools focused on that. If you're a lawyer and you're like starting to think about, wait a minute, like I need to start thinking about the implications, there will be specific tools there. So play around, just roll up your sleeves, take these courses, and then build upon that, right? Like just bite off whatever you can chew, and then you'll start finding that you'll get directed. The other thing I'd say is make sure you sign up for different newsletters, because I'm telling you, even for me, even when I'm like in the midst of it, you want to keep track of what's happening what's happening. Recently, Microsoft's investment into Mistral. I mean, Mistral was an LLM company. I think it's about a year old. So if you went to sleep January 2023 or whatever, December, you may not have ever even heard of them.
I have an interesting question from one of the audience members. So, personally, I have been using AI for a very long time. It is definitely making life easier and save time. But at the same time, I'm afraid that I will start overusing this program and start to develop and stop developing my own skills less and less. So, how do you find a balance between leveraging AI but also staying sharp in certain skills as well?
Yeah, so how many of you still use a calculator, right? Or do math in your head? So I think it's the same dilemma, or for that matter, using a computer and no longer writing. I mean, now I'm dating myself, but I was from the era where computers came in when I was in college. And I used to have beautiful handwriting before that, because in schools you had to have very neat writing. If you try to get me to write anything right now, you'd think I'm a doctor. You couldn't read anything I wrote. So I think some of it, yes, it's going to be very, very hard, and you will lose certain muscles. It's kind of like exercising when you don't exercise them. So if certain things are important to you, just like you take time to do manual exercises, get right, you set time aside. So again, if you're worried that you're going to use the ability to calculate, with your mind, or if you're a writer and you're a creative person and you're like, my God, I want to do some of my own work. I don't want to just put my scripts in in an AI tool. So I think it's all about discipline. But the way I like to think about it is using AI to automate the mundane so that I can do higher value work. I'm really glad that there's some things I'm never going to do again, because quite frankly, it's the equivalent of like submitting expense reports, right? You have to sit and use your mind, and it's time consuming, and I'm fine if I lose certain skills, but definitely the ones you're concerned about, you know, bring discipline back into your life.
Makes sense. What are the main advantages and disadvantages of AI? You definitely cover this across your presentation, but in summary, what would be like the top or key advantages and disadvantages in your view?
AI is not always right. Be very, very careful about that. As 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 we all know, I mean, there's hallucinations. If you go type information, and this is one example where the prior question, do not rely on, well, ChatGPT came back and gave me this. I mean, literally go into it, get a profile made of yourselves. I've done that, and the stuff that the engine has come back with, I feel like laughing because it's a complete farce. So it's incredibly important for those of you that are using it for homework, you're using it to, especially if you're doing it for work or for anything, you fact check. You almost have to become a lawyer. So I also don't rely on it. Even if I'm using it for research, I'll actually then go back and make sure that it just didn't make it up and it's not, again, we're just using ChatGPT as a placeholder name, but this is with a lot of them. And even at a point when it becomes incredibly good, you're gonna have to verify. So to me, that's right now the biggest drawback.
Do you have any concerns about AI from like a social standpoint for our youth, or kind of, some people bring up some concerns around how we are kind of the most connected society, but we can be the loneliest as well. So just any thoughts on from a social standpoint for our youth?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is, it's not just AI specifically, it's technology in general. I think, this is the first time we've had 4 generations in the workforce across 4 very, very different generations. And I think with Gen Z and definitely Gen Alpha, I'm concerned because at least I grew up at a time when I had played outside. And this goes back to, the value of technology is amazing, but, discipline yourself in your life. Like, for example, when you're sitting with friends or family over a meal, your phone, does it have to be next to you? Can you put it in your bag? Set basic etiquette that enables you to be in the present moment because that's all we have. And unfortunately, in an age of AI, I mean, soon, I mean, for those of you that have tried like Apple's Vision Pro, and we're going to even have more experiences that are going to tie us to machines and with humanoids, right? Which we will have, we will be human and machine together as well. And there'll be wonderful things we can accomplish. But if we do not put it aside, um, to experience life as is, it's going to be very hard. So I think being very cognizant of it and having those discussions with your friends, because if you're in the same generation, you'll say, well, what's the big deal? Just be aware of it and maybe, set new, I don't want to call them rules, but ways of engaging with each other where you are giving that human time back.
I love that. Thank you. Could you share some key lessons learned as you reflect on your impressive career and tenure with Microsoft? Maybe any advice for striving female leaders in the workplace?
You can do anything you set your mind to. And let me tell you, especially, I mean, I look, the future, the youth, but especially since we talked about women, we need more of them. We need these diverse voices. I mean, you think about it, women are more than 50% of the world population. And if you look at women representation in anything, it is nowhere near that. And that's what I mean. If you have a fear or you think like, make it your duty and say, I am going, because this area is right now ripe to be conquered. So if you're questioning any aspect of it, you can reinvent yourself with careers in this space. And it's don't be scared if you're not a technical person. You don't need to be, right? And some of those, I think the earlier question also around being scared, if there are areas and things you're passionate about, create businesses around this space because what you can do with AI, I mean, let me choose okay, let me choose a controversial subject. I mean, things like menopause, which is like the other end of the female spectrum. People didn't even talk about it. Can you imagine more than 50% of the population is going to go through this? And there's only now tech companies that are talking about it. Can you just imagine that space? So we need more women. We need more innovation in taboo subjects and other ones. We need employees. We need entrepreneurs. We need women in government. So the sky is the limit. Find your passion, choose the area that, rocks your boat, and then go all in.
aware of ways and examples where we can leverage technology to make a positive impact on society? Perhaps the integration of AI with approaches to general health, or ways we can kind of improve the environment or our own health through it. Any cool examples that you can share?
Uh, well, yeah. So let me just think offhand because we didn't share the names of the companies, but when I was, for example, focusing on AI for autonomous systems, so it had to do with physical things, there was a lot we were doing around renewable energy, and that included, by the way, big oil, because they kind of also are recognizing that fracking is not getting people's imaginations, and they have to go towards renewable sources, wind power, so using AI to control um, windmills or to optimize those. Um, I mentioned in the case of humanoids, but think about, we were working with some robotic companies. So imagine if you are disabled or someone has had an accident, and now all of a sudden you can use AI powered kind of robotic suits to do physical therapy, right? Using that for elderly care because, especially in Western countries, you have a situation where, people are not living at home in multi-generational families, and you have elderly or special needs that are not getting the help they need, and there's a shortage of labor. I think there's just in different ways, companies are incorporating some of these technologies, and in other cases, I think there's huge potential.
The next question is regarding the Middle East, and we know you have experience working in the region. It's of interest from some audience members, also myself. My family is from Lebanon, so definitely interested in the area. So, in your opinion, how can technology and AI support the development of society in the Middle East, or maybe what strategies are you using to innovate in the tech sector in the region?
So I will actually be going there in a couple of weeks. So I haven't yet started. I mean, I did work there actually 15 years ago. And at that time, I was using technology for national health strategies because in the US, there's too much, with HIPAA, especially in the healthcare sector, privacy of information. It was very hard to innovate because you couldn't create I mean, it was just much, much more harder. And I think overseas, especially places like the Middle East, you are able to leapfrog. So I think that still remains an area. The second thing is, I think, through education, right? Because if you look at, for example, Saudi, right? So each of the countries is all different. In some places, you have smaller populations. In other cases, you have larger populations that haven't had the opportunity. Some of those markets are opening up in such a different way, and they want to create more employment. They want to, in this case, it's not even reskilling, it's skilling their populations for the first time. And they're looking at ways that they can become tech centers, they can become talent hubs, right? They can become incubators for different use cases. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity there, and that's across the region. So time will only tell what we actually get involved in. But the beauty, and by the way, the beauty is another example in the Middle East. Like UAE is the first country that ever had the role of a minister of AI. I believe it might be the only one, but don't quote me on that. So that also shows how in the region, right? I mean, it's I understand it's just a role and it's a title, but what that means is you have someone in leadership in the government who is thinking about opportunities for the population, what technology they're gonna use, how they're gonna project themselves as a nation. So I think um, things like this will enable a lot of opportunity within the social fabric.
Thank you for sharing. Can you share insights on how important diversity is in the development of AI and its impact on the future of technology? Maybe how you envision fostering inclusivity within the AI industry and addressing the evolving skill requirements for professionals in this rapidly advancing field.
Yeah, it is critical. So I think you asked me earlier, right? What are some of my concerns? If we do not get enough diverse players involved in the AI that is being developed now, we are going to have to live with the consequences of that. And I think the only people we will have to blame is each other and ourselves, because this is a moment in time, and I mean, I really feel that way. I mean, majority of the conversations I have is about this. because I feel very passionate about it. And I think, just think about it, right? Everything that we don't like about the world today, we complain about bias in search. And I think everyone here knows those stories. You type into a search engine and you put the word terrorism, what faces come up, right? You type in CEOs, you'll only have men show up, right? So I mean, all these things that we get, oh, but wait a minute, why not? So this is a moment in time, get involved, because AI is being trained on these data sets. And if you want to question those data sets, then in fact, some of you listening here, make sure you are looking for jobs where you're like, wait a minute, I'm actually going to go upstream where the tech is being built. Let me go find an LLM company where I can be a product manager, so I can make sure that we put guardrails around this, or I can make sure we understand what sort of training data we're using, right? So that's one. The second one is there's going to be a lot of different types of roles, right? So for example, prompt engineering. I mean, 9 or 10 months ago, this notion didn't even exist. It's also known as AI whisperers. So in order to use these tools very well, linguistically, you have to know what questions to ask. So I think there's different ways we all can get involved. And like I said, also as citizens, right? If you are in a country or in a community, like a locality, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I don't know what regulations my city council are putting in place, but there's nothing about AI that we're doing, and I have concerns, get involved, right? Go reach out to your local politicians. So there's a variety of different ways. I think all of us can play a role in making sure our diverse voices. If you are, like for example, I have a special needs sister, right? So I think a lot about the differently abled, and that's kind of at the back of my mind. And I want to make sure that they're not marginalized in society. So as I was choosing, I mean, Microsoft, for example, when I was working with them, they had a huge focus on using tech for and incorporating folks that had different backgrounds. And I love that, like using AI, like if you're visually impaired, right? So there was technologies that are being developed that enable you, and of course, if you're working at a company that's creating technologies for everybody else, that's also a great vantage point. So I think for each of you, think about where you want to be, think about the skills and passions, and then get involved.
Really great advice. Thank you. We have a few questions that came in regarding the impact of AI on different job functions, industries, like with automation. Are there certain roles or sectors that you think will be transform more quickly than others or be more impacted than others with this advent of AI?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So think about clerical work, right? Where you have to take large amounts of data and manually process it. All of that stuff is going to get automated. So if you're, for example, combing through legal documents, so like it's in the UK they call them solicitors, paralegals, right? So receptionists, yeah, so those types of functions where you can automate any of that work, which through the technology that's available today will be the first roles that will have a significant chunk. Customer service reps, right? Call centers, because as you can see, it's already automating. I think up until about a year and a half ago, conversational AI technology was weak. So you still had humans in the mix, and you will, but you will start seeing a lot of that go away. And this is where I think having your reskilling roadmap is going to be very important, and thinking, so if you're working somewhere, maybe your companies are providing that service. If they're not providing it, maybe your country is providing it. I think I missed a slide somewhere in my think around Singapore about I think a few weeks ago, or it's relatively recent news, which is great because, think about nations not wanting to be left behind. Singapore as a nation has instituted teaching AI skill sets to their over 40, because they number one, they want to remain competitive. Number two, they want to make sure that they don't marginalize a significant chunk of their community. So they've identified that group as being one where they need to help. They're giving certain credits to them, and then they're also investing a lot in building up the AI kind of infrastructure and opportunities so that they can meet the talent can connect to that, right? So I think but if you don't come from Singapore, it simply means that, again, I mean, you guys are interning at the UN, so many of you are connecting with the powers that be for your nations, and ask the questions and say, well, why don't we have a strategy like Singapore? What does it take? Bring the private industry together with government and make that happen. So, there are nations leading the way, and you can start leveraging off of that. But yes, I mean, I didn't want to spend time talking about it, but there will absolutely be roles that will go away, and they will go away much faster than others.
In our last 2 minutes together, do you mind just sharing kind of either what you're excited about in the coming years in terms of AI and technology, or how you foresee this rapidly evolving space changing in the coming years?
Yeah, what I'm most excited about, so I'm a globalist at heart. Um, I'm less focused on nation states. I think the part that I'm most excited about is how we are going to see innovations coming out from every remote corner of the world. And this is why I'm saying each one of you on this call and your friends, you need the internet connection and you need a device, but go reskill, because the next unicorn, why does it have to come either from China or the US, or, why can't it come? I mean, these countries are already doing a great job, but why can't it come from wherever you are? Right? It should come from Kazakhstan. It should come from Mali, right? It should come from Peru. It should come from, the Cook Islands. So I'm the most excited about AI being an equalizer. But obviously, having said that, we need to play a role in that process, right? We can't just sort of sit on the sidelines and wait for the rain to fall. So I think that's the biggest piece. And the second one is we haven't even seen the potential of AI yet. So I talked about all these investments and things. I mean, honestly, if you have an idea and you think you can leverage the technology and you can get some people together, you can build your future. We live in an era where we can build our future and create the businesses or invest in those, or contribute to ways that we can use this technology to, like you said, earlier, if you're passionate about the environment and, climate change, as we know, is such a huge thing, you can innovate and actually start tackling these problems. And we are at a point where technology now can help solve or chip away at major problems in the world.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Dr. Durbeck to close out.
And thank you very, very much for a very interesting, informative presentation. I am very interested in the fact that you are feeling very positive about the future, because from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of very, very negative and concerned feelings about what's going to happen. Again, thank you very much, and we wish you a very, very good week, and of course, a very, very bright future. Bye-bye. Thank you, Susie.
My pleasure. Thank you.